In 1853, 12 clay tablets were found in the ancient city of Nineveh. On these tablets was written an epic, a narrative that recorded an account of a global flood to destroy all of humanity. This has led scholars and some skeptics to say that the Bible's account of a flood story is not original, but they plagiarized. They copied this other myth or those like it. Is this true? Did the Bible plagiarize and come up with unoriginal material for the flood? I'm Joshua Woodard. I am the geologian, where I try to bridge the gap between questions just like this one and you and your Bible so you can better understand Scripture and get closer to God and answer those tough questions. So, we're going to go ahead and dive straight into the text, straight into our topic today. And so, what is this epic that I talked about? It's called the Epic of Gilgamesh because it takes place in an ancient time about a king named Gilgamesh. And it's this whole narrative about these journeys and adventures that he goes on. And one of those tablets includes an account where he meets a man who survived a global flood. And some of the details and the account match and are similar to what the Bible explains about Noah and God sending a flood on the earth. So I want to go through a little bit of the details of the epic and then compare it with what we know about Noah's flood to see if this claim is true, or at least does it have any merit to it. So the Gilgamesh, the Epic of Gilgamesh, or some scholars call it the Gilgamesh Epic. In the tablet that talks about the global flood, you have a council of gods. So it's polytheistic. You have this council of deities who are talking, and they decide that they are going to destroy mankind. It's not exactly clear on why from the text. It just talks about their heart leading them to do so. It's very vague in that aspect. But they decide to go ahead and do this, and they're going to use a flood to destroy mankind. One of these deities actually warn one man in particular about this flood. And they tell him to go ahead and build, the wording is still an ark, but some kind of vessel to save himself, his family, and a few other people, along with some animals, from this flood. And so he brings all of them into it. He builds this boat. The flood comes, and it lasts 6 days and 7 nights. And afterwards, the survivors offer a sacrifice, and it saves the gods from starvation. Actually, in that belief system, the gods received food and nourishment from the sacrifices of mankind. So with mankind all gone from the flood, they're starving. The gods are like, we need food. And so the survivor offers a sacrifice. They are fed, the gods are fed, and they give him immortality for his sacrifice and for feeding them and helping them. So there's some similarities here, and I want to go through those because there is some merit to this claim. So let's quickly go through the similarities. Well, one, there's some sort of divine aspect of sending a flood of waters against mankind. One man is told to build a boat for his family and animals to survive. I didn't record this detail, but they even send out some birds. So just like Noah, where he sends out the raven and the doves, this man also sends out birds when the flood waters are abating, they're lowering. And then they both offer sacrifices. So those are some of the similarities between them. However, a lot of scholars that I've read focus really heavily on the similarities. They just focus on, well, look, obviously the Bible had to copy from this one. And a main reason is because the way they've dated the Epic of Gilgamesh is at a much earlier date. So it's older than the surviving texts we have of the Hebrew account of the flood, of the biblical account. So if one is older than the other, they say, well, the other one had to have come second, and therefore it copied. So, but I don't want to just focus on the similarities. I want to see the differences as well, because I think those are much greater than the similarities. So first is the moral character of the gods. So you have these divine beings, like I said, who it was in their heart. They just felt like they had to do this. There's even another account that's similar to this. There's different versions of this text, by the way. And there's another one. It's from a slightly different region where it talks about, and they call it a different name, but it talks about the gods. One of the gods in particular, the humans are making too much noise, and it's waking him up. It's giving him insomnia, and so he's mad, and he wants to get rid of humanity because they make too much noise. So often in these accounts, the moral character of the divine beings is quite questionable. They definitely sound more like men than they do gods. Um, so in this instance, they just felt like it. It's not like a reason. Whereas in the Bible, God is specifically judging sin. It's so wicked that every single intention and motive in the human heart is evil, and God wants to remove that. That's his decision and his reasoning behind this. Another big thing I already mentioned is the Bible is monotheistic. It's just Yahweh. Whereas in the Epic of Gilgamesh and the other accounts, there's multiple. It's a council, polytheism. And I briefly mentioned it. The gods are very much like human. They can die, they eat, they can starve, they need things, and the God of the Bible does not. If he destroyed all of mankind, he'd be fine. He existed before mankind even existed. So this is huge difference in the divine beings. Secondly, and I think this is the most important thing that shows that the Bible did not copy, and this is the realistic details behind it. So the first of these is the dimensions of the ark. So in the Gilgamesh epic, we're told that the boat is supposed to be the same dimension on all sides, height, length, and depth. And it's basically turns out to be a cube. And I have a picture of it. I'm going to show you what it looks like, or at least the interpretation of what it looks like. This is a picture of the interpretation of what the ark would have looked like according to the Epic of Gilgamesh. So this is a picture that I took while I visited the Ark Encounter. It's an exhibit, life-size ark done by the Answers in Genesis organization. So this is a model of what they think it looks like, and you can see here it is a complete cube. And the text within the Epic of Gilgamesh, it states that it has 7 decks. All the dimensions are equal. And the problem with this cube, is that if you were to place this in the water, it's buoyant, but it would just roll over end. Any sort of disruption in the water, like a wave. I mean, this is supposed to be a global flood, right? So this is disastrous. So you have this cube floating, waves hit the side, and it just spins. All the animals, all the people in here would have died. The food stores probably would have been destroyed. This thing, they're not going to live within this, even 7 days. Can you imagine spinning like this repeatedly and slamming against the walls, animals striking you? Like, you're not going to survive in this. So this is not very realistic. However, the biblical flood is more like an oblong cube, is a word that Jonathan Safadi describes it as. And I mean, if I've shown you a picture before on here, I can show you another one. This is the oblong cube shape that I mentioned. And this is actually a diagram that's taken from, I took this out of Jonathan Sarfati's The Genesis Account, and he cites this from another scholar. But this is math that has been done to show, it has the dimensions here, like it says 30 cubits, 50 cubits, 15 and 10. It's doing the math here to see, could the ark, the boat that's described in the dimensions that it's given in the Bible, could it have actually survived a global flood? And he cites naval architects that say that this boat would have been able to survive up to 3 times hurricane force winds and able to navigate safely through the waters of up to 100-foot waves. And even more so, it shows you down here where my cursor's at. It could still right itself if it pitched up to 60 degrees. And the amount of force it would take to force something like this into a 60-degree pitch like that, it's not going to happen. The severe amount of buoyancy this thing has, the weight it would have in the water, the amount of water it would displace, along with the dimensions, it would have aligned itself with the wind because it would almost have acted like a sail because the wind would blow against it and rotate it and would line it up with the waves. The waves wouldn't be hitting the side. It'd be going along with it. And you're not going to get 100-foot waves out in the middle of the ocean like this. Tsunamis have been known to get up close to that, but those are when it hits land. Tsunamis aren't really dangerous out in the ocean like this. So the Ark is going to be one of the most survivable boats. It's a lifeboat that could have been built. And it's not meant to be navigated. It's not a sailboat. It's not something that Noah would have been pointing in a direction. It's just meant to be livable. And as you can see through this, as well with the math, and I encourage you to go read Sarfati's book along with some other sources that he gives to do the math yourself. It's amazing how well designed this would be. And it makes sense if God was trying to design something as an ultimate lifeboat for a world-destroying flood. So, let's discuss why that's important. These details matter because the claim is that the Bible took the cube-like Epic of Gilgamesh arc and adapted it and turned it into what I just showed you. The most survivable boat you could get on during this flood. And that does not make any sense. So you have to think about who would have been writing this. It would have been an Israelite, an early Jew, right? These people were not known for their naval architecture. They weren't known for their fleets or making amazing boats. This is not something that they would have been proficient at, especially the person who's writing this, or at least editing it together, was Moses, or maybe a priest originally, someone who is more religiously minded, or a scholar, like an historian recording these things. These people were not naval architects. So it does not make sense that they would take something that you cannot live in at all, and instead of just taking those dimensions and then adding Yahweh into it, instead they looked at it and went, this boat, no one could live in this. This is unbelievable. We need to change this. We need to make it the greatest thing that ever could have been done. And if this flood never actually occurred or was smaller and they were just changing these details, they'd need to know precise dimensions and mathematics to make this work. It just does not make sense. The claim falls short. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me to believe this. Rather, what makes more sense to me is this account, the biblical flood with this ark and these dimensions, which we've shown has been designed for survival. Instead, over time, after Babel, when the languages were dispersed and all of the families dispersed across the earth, people would have known about the flood account. And as they spread, the details were lost over time. Things became muddied and not as clear as they used to be. And for the sake of memorization and retaining the story, 3 different dimensions of the arc became one. It's much easier to just memorize one unit of dimension and make it a cube than remember this many cubits by this many cubits by this many cubits, and you also have to have a window with this many cubits on top. And it was extremely specific. Instead, it's one dimension on all sides. And God's even more specific about how to take the animals and the food, and it is more likely that these details were lost or removed for memory retention, and instead, the other accounts, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, is actually just a watered-down version of the biblical account. That makes a much greater sense. It's a much clearer claim, and it fits the biblical history. I prefer that one. If I'm gonna say it doesn't. No pun intended. The claim that the Gilgamesh epic was the first does not hold water. Even there's other details of the story that show it's even more unrealistic. It just talks about 6 days and 7 nights, and that's enough to destroy everything on Earth. And also, the gods who are divine are starving in that short amount of time. Versus the Bible, it rather, when you look at the details of it, it tells you exactly how old Noah was when the flood came. He was 600 years old. It tells you in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, on the 17th day of that month. It is so specific. 40 days and 40 nights, water fell. It continues. The flood continued 40 days on the earth, and it rose high above the earth. And all the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. At the end of the 150 days, that's when it came down in the seventh month, on the 17th day of that month. So it is so specific on which thing happened when it did. And these numbers don't seem to be specifically significant. And neither are the dimensions of the boat. Rather, these seem like someone's writing this down. Like Noah in the ark is sitting there. Okay, the floodwaters are coming down on this day, and he's writing it on a tablet or something. Okay, after 40 days, the rain stopped, and he writes that down. These are very specific things, whereas it's just 7 days. And we know 7 is a significant number for the people that lived around Mesopotamia and the ancient Near East. It's a number that means it's complete, it's finished. Which is a number they probably got because creation took 7 days and everything was finished. It was perfect the way God wanted it. So these things show that the Epic of Gilgamesh and other epics and narratives like this of the flood are watered down. They're missing details. They were adapted over time, whereas the biblical account retains all of these historical details for a reason. It retains those dimensions of an ark because that's what was originally given. They were needed for survival. Whereas a Mesopotamian person, the Epic of Gilgamesh, recording this, those details, those measurements don't truly matter. We're just trying to get into the story. They didn't know that those values actually mattered for the survival of the passengers. It just became a significant religious number. So these are the kind of details that make me think of this. And there's one last one. I don't think this is the strongest one. I think we've already hit that. But even the order of the birds that's sent out in the Epic of Gilgamesh doesn't make sense. So first, you have the Noah character of the epic sending out a dove. He lets the dove fly out, and then he sends out a raven. When the raven doesn't come back, he's like, oh, we're good. Whereas Noah sends out a raven first, and when it doesn't return, he sends out doves. And eventually, when the dove doesn't return, now he knows. And the difference here makes sense because Noah probably would have understood that a raven not returning is not that big of a deal. He kind of realized his mistake because a raven is a carrion feeder. They eat carcasses. And what would have been plentiful if everything was just destroyed? The bodies of animals destroyed in the flood. So that thing was probably out eating. And it was fine. Whereas the doves, they're looking for a place to stay and to nest. So when those didn't come back, then he knew. Again, the Epic of Gilgamesh doesn't care about those details as much. Those were flopped, and they weren't caught because they weren't thinking about these kinds of things. They just recorded the birds. So, does this claim make sense? No. It makes more sense that the Bible came first, and the epic came afterwards. And some skeptics and scholars will still push against this. Say, well, no, the similarities are too much. And this one came first. Some scholars don't even say that. They say that both just came off of both the biblical account and the Epic of Gilgamesh, and the others were derived from one story that was original to the local area. And that would make sense. However, there are over 500 flood accounts across the world, across the entire world. It's not just the ancient Near East. You have some from Egypt and Scandinavia. You have others from Europe. You have some from native North America. The natives of Australia have one. Mexico, the Aztecs have one. It's all over the place. Over 500 accounts, and the similarities are shockingly similar. Now, they differ on the deities and the type of boat. Sometimes it's a piece of bark, sometimes it's a canoe. That seems to be based on the culture, on the boats they would have used. However, there are some other similarities, like one man or one family being saved. It's a god who warns them. There's even the sending out of birds. A lot of them contain birds being sent out to see at the end. It's not just like, oh, there's a flood and there's a boat and mankind is saved. Some of them are like that, but why are these tiny little details all saved? There's one from the natives of Australia that specifically records when the god tells them he's going to destroy the world because of a wickedness. He tells him and his family to get in, take animals. He sends out specific birds after the flood goes away, and then afterwards he offers a sacrifice, and even after that, there's a rainbow. And the rainbow has a specific significance, and when they look on it, they're to know that that God won't destroy them with flood waters anymore. These details, they're thousands of miles apart from each other, and they still have these same details. So we could say, yes, it's everyone has a big flood in their culture, and so they just made an account, and it's just by coincidence that all of these tiny little details match. Or we could go with what's more likely, that there was one global flood, and after the flood, and mankind began to repopulate, and they spread across the earth, they took that account with them. And as they became polytheistic and the years went by, details were lost and changed to fit their current culture, and it became the accounts they had then. All of these things point to the biblical account of the flood being historical and accurate, and that it is the original. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. I hope you guys do your own research. Go and look these things up. Creation.com has a lot of these. Answers in Genesis has a lot of these as well. I'll put some links below the video so you can click on those and go find them. Read up on these. Read these other accounts. Read the Epic of Gilgamesh too. And look at those details and see the differences and the similarities and just how amazing it is that it all matches up with what God tells us about the Bible. So, until next time, friends, I'll see you later.